Our first speaker is Dr. Gabrielle Kuiper, who is an energy, sustainability and climate change professional with over 20 years' experience in the corporate world, government and non-government organisations and academia. She's held senior executive or senior advisory roles in energy-related decisions in the Energy Security Board, the Office of the Prime Minister at the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, and in the New South Wales Government. She currently works internationally and in Australia on policy and regulation to support distributed energy resources, including as a guest contributor with IEEFA and a DER specialist for Integrate to Zero. And Gabrielle is talking about more than half the solution, DER's role in energy and transport decarbonisation. So please welcome Gabrielle.
Thanks very much, Ken. I too would like to acknowledge that we're here on Gadigal land and pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge their 60,000 years of custodianship of the country that we're on. It's a great delight to be here. Thanks to the conference organisers for inviting me to kick things off. Last time I spoke at this conference, I believe it was in 2018, can't see Professor Ian McGill in the audience, but he pulled me aside after my presentation. He said, be careful talking about abundant solar because, you know, we've had all these narratives over the year that energy of various kinds is going to be too cheap to meter and might get in trouble. Yesterday, AEMO put out a report on minimum system load about how to manage system security when we have a surplus of solar. So Ian's not often wrong, but I'm going to be talking about abundant solar and also storage and flexible demand, the three kinds of distributed energy resources, and look at some of the basic engineering that's needed, some of the more sophisticated ways in which we can integrate distributed energy resources, and obviously we'll try and put that in the context of rooftop solar, but as we know, it's rooftop solar that's really driving this change. But it's now never a discussion about rooftop solar alone. It's always in combination with these other resources. That's how we're going to get the fastest, cheapest transition. And generally, we're going to get a faster, cheaper transition the more uptake of DER we have and the better we integrate it. All the Australians in the room will be familiar with the fact that we broke the 50% threshold in the national electricity market this year. So rooftop solar alone, for a brief period, but every 5 minutes in the NEM counts, met 50% of demand sort of 6 weeks ago. And my favourite is South Australia, where the record of over 100% of supply by rooftop solar alone in a state of 1.8 million people keeps getting higher and higher. I'm currently leading a project developing a DER strategy for Peninsular Malaysia. And there, where we were maybe a decade ago, they've had a report done saying they can only have maybe 30% variable renewables on their grid. And so I was able to lead workshops and put a graph like this up, and everyone's eyeballs popped, right? And I'm able to say we've achieved this in Australia with relatively little investment. This did not cost billions, and the grid has not broken. So the kind of technological scaremongering that Australia went through, hopefully other countries can leapfrog past that on the basis of our experience. So Ty Christopher at the University of Wollongong likes to say, to the rejoinder, there will be no transition without transmission, by saying the revolution will be in distribution. And that's why I work in DER. I think it's the most complex and fascinating part of the energy transition. because we're not simply replacing like for like. We're putting all of these resources behind the meter or front of the meter and distribution connected, and that means we need to completely change how we think about the engineering and the operation of the system. However, the benefits of DER, as I'll show, are still being underestimated. One of the challenges here is, as far as I know, no private equity firm or investment bank has DER as an investment class. It's not seen as in the same way as project investment or infrastructure investment in the same way that transmission or large-scale renewables are. But when you total it up, obviously the sums are still significant. So over 25 billion in household and business expenditure on rooftop solar and batteries, and an enormous amount to come, particularly in electric vehicles. So rule of thumb, the integrated system plan, which everyone in Australia will know inside out, it's about a third of generation and 2/3 of storage will be behind the meter by 2050. I've written a report for the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, which is what IEEFA stands for. It's an independent think tank, looking at all the ways in which those estimates are still underestimates, including because of the speed at which we're seeing the technology evolve, and given our sponsor, ARENA's ambitions for further lowering the cost of solar. So I think we know that solar has won in terms of being the cheapest form of renewable generation, but we're also going to see how that partners with batteries and also electric vehicles. Obviously, electric vehicles is an area where Australia is substantially behind the leading countries in the world, but I think the potential there is obviously really significant. I'm very bullish on vehicle to grid, but also vehicle to home will be really important. And we're already seeing a number of motor vehicle manufacturers import vehicles into Australia that can either do a vehicle to load, home or grid. And I've seen a device, someone in the room will know what it is, that I forgot to look up the name of, that sells for $1,000 that converts your vehicle to load EV to vehicle to home. So this is also going to happen much faster than we think. So the more I think about DER, the more I recognise it is significantly different from large-scale renewables, and that's because it can be aggregated. So often this is solar plus batteries, but it's also vitally important we don't forget the role of flexible demand, because those are the low-hanging electrons. They are the opportunity to move, for example, hot water into the middle of the day. UTS research has shown we could do that and create 22 gigawatts of electric hot water demand if we do electrification of our hot water systems in Australia well, for example. So aggregated DER, some of you might know about virtual power plants, other people are talking about distributed power plants, but other people just want to talk about aggregated DER. Whatever you call it, it doesn't just provide supply or storage or emergency capacity under like the RERT or frequency control and ancillary services, but also, so I'll get to at the end of this presentation, it can provide network support services. So hence my metaphor that DER is the Swiss Army knife of energy technologies. The question I had in my mind is, how did we show and convince policymakers that the benefits of DER, which are logical, you've got it behind the meter, you're co-locating generation and load, you can you obviously reducing the use of the network, but also can provide network support services, all the logic that everyone in the room, I'm sure, understands. How do you add that up in economic terms? So I went through 9 analyses that had been done for singular types of DER or DER collectively over the years. And this meta-analysis suggested that we would get $19 billion NPV by 2040 if we make the most of distributed energy resources. So roughly half of that, $11 billion in avoided network costs, both transmission and distribution, $8 billion in generation and storage costs. And what's not included, and apologies to any gentailers in the room, but it's also going to reduce generator supernormal profits by $10 billion. Basically, your evening peak, where all the revenue is currently for our generators, is largely going to disappear if we do all of this well. So, as with the totals of gigawatts for things like hot water, the economic benefits really do add up. So that's probably what a lot of people in the room already know. What I'm going to move to now is some of the basic things that we need to do to integrate DER well into the grid. Obviously, visibility is the first challenge and opportunity. In Victoria, 100% smart meters, no problem. What's really exciting is to see the emergence of companies like GridSight and GridCube, who can do extrapolations using data science to create high degrees of visibility with a relatively small number, say 30% penetration of smart meters. And I think there's a really exciting interaction now between data science and renewables, and it's also another opportunity for Australian innovators to create software and services companies that will be able to export this technology internationally. And obviously, thanks to UTS and the Energy Networks Association, we have some visibility publicly available, but it's not below the substation level yet, so there's a wee way to go on that. I probably don't need to talk about the importance of technical standards in this audience. Probably also don't need to talk about the fact that we've been waiting 5 years so far for a technical standards body, but it is in the National Consumer Energy Resources Roadmap that next year there'll be legislation in the Federal Parliament to create a technical standards body, and that's due to be operational in 2027. So vitally important, long delayed, and I think is one data point about how distributed energy resources haven't been taken seriously enough by our policymakers and regulators to date. Voltage management. So when I was at the Energy Security Board around 2019, 2020, people kept telling me solar is causing all these voltage rises on the grid and it's causing major problems. And no one could show me any data. So Ian McGill's just walked into the room with perfect timing because I rang Ian and said, we need to do some analysis because I'm hearing all this technical scaremongering, but no one will show me any data. And I think it's interesting how often we get technical scaremongering in energy when it's a data-based policy debate. So fortunately, Ian, Baron, Anna, Rob Passy as well, a number of people probably in the room, did this fantastic work looking at what the voltages actually were across the NEM using solar analytics data. And lo and behold, the average voltages were well above the 230 standard, including in the middle of the night, which would suggest that the cause was not rooftop solar. So this is an interesting one because it's a legacy issue. I'll go into the reasons for it, but rooftop solar was being blamed, and I think we need to be careful about that kind of circumstance arising elsewhere. The good news is that the Victorian government saw the data and acted on it. They got the Victorian DNSPs in the room and said, tell us about your voltages. And basically this is the result. I've subsequently seen similar data for Queensland. So at least in 2 states, the voltages now are falling, which, as you all know, not only has benefits in terms of reduced sales of electricity, but also reduced damage to appliances. I think the Victorian government number is they've already saved consumers on average $32 million a year. So these technical essentials are really important to get right. Hands up if you've heard of flexible exports, dynamic operating envelopes. Is there anyone in the room that doesn't know what it is? Yes, there are. So one of the things that happened when people started installing rooftop solar, obviously like 1.5 kilowatt system, no problem. But as system sizes got larger, DNSPs were concerned about the impact on the grid, and so most of them set a 5 kilowatt static limit. Dynamic operating envelopes are essentially software that started out being developed by the South Australian Power Network, and they do a hosting capacity assessment 24 hours ahead on 5-minute increments, broadcast that to solar inverters so that they can export up to a 10 kilowatt limit, so a doubling of the limit. When I first heard about this, I was like, fantastic, maybe 50, 60, 70% of the time we'll be able to double exports from people's household solar. After they'd developed all this technology, they did some further modelling and found they would only need to constrain rooftop solar in South Australia, which has over 50% of households with rooftop solar, about 2% of the time. It's about 50 hours a year, basically in spring, low load, high generation. So this is a fantastic innovation. It's been a bit slow to roll out around the country. So I have a briefing note coming out for IEEFA next week that recommends that we have a joint rule change to put in place fast, consistent implementation of dynamic operating envelopes around the NEM. There are problems, for example, AusNet services have required the use of a switched-in droplet, so proprietary technology to make flexible exports work. That does not seem in consumers' interests for that kind of variation to occur nationwide. The other thing we could do at the same time is look at the emergency solar cut-off mechanism, because some states are linking dynamic operating envelopes and the solar cut-off together and using that mechanism. We haven't had a public policy debate about this, and I think it's very important that we do so, and very important that we can agree on how to do this in a nationally consistent way. I think dynamic operating envelopes are essential to realise the value of DER. Obviously, if you double solar exports, you can increase revenue, improve the return on investment for households and for businesses where the dynamic operating envelopes apply for them. And if you want to know more, the good people at Melbourne Uni have developed an entire course about the hardcore data science software and energy engineering around dynamic operating envelopes, and that's all available online. So those are all the basic kind of things that we need to get right. Then I think we need to think about how to be more sophisticated with our use of DER to maximise the benefits. Some of you might be aware that in the UK, Great Britain itself, about 20% of the network is constrained. If you're in a constrained area and have a 10 kilowatt hour battery, you can earn up to £331 per year by importing or exporting from the grid when required. And in the UK, they call those flexibility services. It's a bit confusing. Here we call them network support services. In the US, they call them non-network solutions or non-wire solutions. Everyone's got a different name. Eventually, we might agree on it. But regardless of the name, this is a fantastic opportunity to reduce the cost, particularly in terms of CapEx expenditure on the distribution network. So the number that was researched for the UK in 2017 by Imperial College London and the Carbon Trust is if they put these flexibility markets in place, they could save consumers up to £40 billion by 2050. So this is a slowly growing market in the UK. This year up to 2.4 gigawatts has been procured. It's an annual kind of online auction process, but they went out, all of the distribution businesses in Britain went out to market for about double that. So this is also a bit of a chicken and egg problem. You know, you'll often hear DNSPs say, we went out for alternatives under the RIT-D process and we couldn't find anyone to provide us these services. What I think we need to do there is change the economic regulation of our distribution networks. I wrote a very long report about how and why we need to do that for IEEFA. It's available online. The good news is that there's a really exciting project EDITH through Ausgrid to look at not only how we provide network services, but how we do that in real time. So this is real-time network pricing. It's very small, it's very challenging, there's a lot to do to get this to work, but I really like this model because the British model is that you go out to tender, it's an online platform, it's annual, and it's not dynamic at all, whereas Project EDITH is proposing to make use of all of the DER assets in real time. I want to finish on resilience because we've talked about all of the other reasons why integrating distributed energy resources into the grid makes economic sense and all of the different benefits it can provide. Obviously, our national electricity rules at the moment have no provision for taking resilience into account, but it's increasingly important. So Newcastle City Council have been very proactive on their net zero targets and actions. At their waste treatment plant, they built a ground-mounted solar system because the land was not usable for other purposes. And then they started considering about investment in new garbage trucks. And they thought, well, if we get new garbage trucks, they can go and dump their waste and fuel up at the solar farm. What they also factored into the business case is that Newcastle is in the Hunter. The Hunter is increasingly prone to flooding and to bushfires. So part of the business case was that we can send this fleet of electric trucks out to provide emergency power supply when it is needed in these increasingly frequent extreme weather events. So while it's not in the rules, I think the speed at which our climate is changing means that we need to prioritise resilience, and obviously distributed energy resources have an inherent resilience in them. And so I'd like to finish by saying DR shouldn't come second in policy making. It's not large-scale renewables and then that small stuff maybe if we get round to thinking about it. But we need to give priority to both, at least on equal terms, and we need to have thoughtful consideration of its benefits. So thank you very much, and hopefully we have a couple of minutes for questions.